This is my Riccar R40 vacuum cleaner. I bought it used recently, and it is pretty much all torn apart right now and lots of pieces. I got the circuit boards up here and all the hardware. You can see the motors over there, the base plate, and all the housing, and the brush roll. So this was working fine. I should say mostly fine. When I first bought it, say about a month ago, the brush roll would trip off easily. It would mostly vacuum, but once you dug it into the carpet a little bit, the brush roll would trip off. And from what I read, you either have a circuit board issue or an issue with the Hall effect sensor. So I tore it apart and found out the Hall effect sensor, which is somewhere over here. It's in the back there. That was jammed up with hair, so that was an easy fix. And I simply just tore all the hair out of it and put everything back together, and it was working great. But this thing just stunk like a dog. It was filled with dog hair. It was pretty dirty and gross, so I decided to tear everything apart and clean it out. Initially, I was just kind of taking some of the brush roll, stuff like that off, just trying to do a quick clean on it, and it was just filled with tons and tons of hair. So I just basically continued to tear the entire thing apart, and that's what you see here. More or less, that's the housing. I got the hose over here. I cleaned all that up. What you're seeing now is all cleaned. Everything was torn off and cleaned. There's the cord. There's the motors, the direct air motor and the clean air motor. Sorry, got them backwards. Direct air and clean air motor, Hall effect sensor, the base plate, some of the wire harnesses, lots of pieces, parts. I took the entire brush roll apart too, and basically rebuilt that. Everything looked pretty good in there. And then I cleaned up the circuit boards as well, which is a little risky. We'll see if they work or not. Hopefully they still work. I did coat. This is the dirt sensor board, which is kind of towards the front, near the brush roll, and it is not conformal coated with a urethane, which I was pretty surprised. The main board and the light board are conformal coated with urethane, and this board was not coated, so I went ahead and put you can see a little shine to it now. I put a acrylic conformal coat on it to help protect it, because it was pretty dirty. So I basically just took some isopropyl alcohol, rubbing alcohol, and cleaned all these boards up with a toothbrush, which is a little risky, but I went for it. I've done it before, and it's worked out for me, so I'm hoping in it fry them. We'll find out if they still work. So I used, to clean this up, I used a bunch of different cleaning solutions. I wasn't really quite sure what to use. So I basically used some Lysol sanitizer. I also used some dog odor and urine solution, just to kind of get some of the dog smell out of it. I used some Simple Green degreaser, and I also used like a floor cleaner, just an all-purpose cleaner, just to kind of clean it up. So depending on what smelled or how dirty things were, I'd use different solutions to clean some of the stuff. This is something different that I found too. It's I got this at Walmart. It was like $6 or $7. It's a lens cleaner for eyeglasses. So basically, it's like Windex, but these people claim that it has like a nano protectant. After you put it on, it puts a little coating on it to keep things clean. I was trying to lean away from. Initially, I was going to use Pledge furniture polish, which seems like a lot of people use, and I kind of leaned away from that because some people kind of bash it for having silicone in it and waxes, and over time those I've read that they can actually attract more dust. So I was trying to I wanted to try something different, and so I tried this stuff right here, and it seemed to work pretty good. You can see a little shine on it, and I compared it to some other stuff, and it does leave a little bit of a protective finish to it, which I kind of liked, and it hopefully doesn't have all the waxes and the silicones like the furniture polish does. So we'll see. But I did contact them to ask them if it had silicone in it. I've yet to find that out. I couldn't find any info on it. They're pretty secretive on what's in it, but eventually I'll find that out, hopefully. But this is it all torn apart, and I'm gonna start putting it back together and hope that it fires back up and still works. I also used some dry lube. I've seen some videos of people using oil to lubricate some items, and I wasn't too crazy about that because being a vacuum, all the dust and buildup would kind of collect on that oil and cake up, in my opinion. So I thought a dry lube would work well. This is a non-graphite dry lube, so it's basically a Teflon, PTFE, and it's basically solvent with little pieces of Teflon in it. So I spray little things like the wheels, and I did like the felt seals. In here I sprayed that with it, so more or less it puts a little coat of Teflon on those things, and it keeps them lubricated without the mess of oil, and it won't drop junk on your carpet either, because it's just white Teflon basically. So I'm gonna start at some point here to throw this back together, and we'll see how it goes. And I did mention this was a Riccar R40, and it's I don't know, 5-6 years old maybe. I think it was built in 2019. It's the pet version. It's an R40P. That's the .4 version, which was around that time, about 5 years ago. I think they're on the .8 right now. R40.8. There was a 0.6 in there as well. But this one does have a ground wire on the motor that goes to, I'm trying to think where that's at. At one point they added foil to ground things better, but does not have that little grounding tab, which I'm going to add. I read that's a good thing to add to these, because Riccar thought at one point that static electricity was frying the circuit board, so they added this and a little wire. But basically that wire is just, that wire right there, the end of it is just stuck inside this tape, and mine was loose. It was barely on there, and they changed that at one point. I think on the 0.6 models, 0.6 or 0.8s, they change it, and they went to a little spring that attaches to that motor to this to try to dissipate some of the static electricity. Honestly, I'm not really sure how that works, because this is not a grounded appliance. There's no ground on here, so there's nowhere for the static to dissipate to an earth ground. So it's basically just going from the housing to that motor, and has nowhere to go from that motor. But I'm not sure. I'm sure they have it figured out, but that's what they did. And hopefully that'll keep my circuit board from getting fried after I add that tab in there. Alright, so we're starting to piece this thing back together here. Let's see all the parts over here, and I got some of it put back together on the main housing here. So first thing I did was, to start out putting everything back in, was this wire harness here. I routed through this hole and had a little piece of foam to kind of seal it off, and I carefully had that removed, set aside. And then so this was all off to this back cover plate, and that plate as well, and this little adapter was off, and the valve here was off, as well as the handle. So when all this was off, I routed the wire as it normally was, the wire harness through here, and it includes this little micro switch for the valve, which turns off the motor, one of the motors. And so you have to reroute that through this cover before you put that on, and then you have to put your valve back in here, obviously, and just be careful with the felt on the valve that it stays intact, and the adhesive on it doesn't come off and get caught up in there. But mine looked pretty good. It stayed pretty clean. So after I got the wire harness placed back in this, it has like a little groove here that goes through the other side. As I said earlier, I put had a little self-adhesive a seal right there. I stuck that back on, and then I mounted my valve back on, I believe, and then this cover and that cover and that cover. And at that time you can put your handle back on too, because the handle, there's a there's a wire harness for the power that comes into the handle that clips in up here. So you clip that in as well, and then you can clip your handle down into it and reattach your handle. And after you get all that, you can basically button up all this whole back plate with all these screws right here. With the back plate, as I said, and then that cover, then that. And then I believe that's about it on the back side for now. And then I reattached a little carbon filter bracket right here. I think there's this one screw right in there, if you can see it. And there's one screw, and then you can see there's a gasket goes around the whole thing. You have to put the gasket in before you reattach that. At least just in the section. That's what I did, was just this section so far. You can see the gasket's still off. And then this is where the harness comes back up through. And then I'll have to reattach the thermal protector down in there, right there. And then there's another little micro switch here that came out. This was the what shuts off your brush roll when you tilt the vacuum cleaner upright. So I'll reroute that through there, reattach that. And then I think there was a little piece of electrical tape from the factory to hold that down in there. And then these are two little basically little barb connectors that go from this wall of the housing into the bagged area. Those get connected up to your circuit board to detect if there's a bag leak and things like that in the filter. It attaches to the the pressure switch, air pressure switch on the circuit board. And then I forgot to mention that there's one cover also that goes over here, this switch assembly here, which gets mounted like that, I believe. It just goes in with one screw, so I'll reattach that as well. Alright, we got some of our components reinstalled into the housing here. Our two motors, the direct air motor and the clean air motor. Circuit board has been reinstalled, everything's wired back up. And I'll just kind of walk you through how I did this and some things I did that maybe the average person shouldn't do. Some things I think are just a little odd to me on the design, and some things I did to kind of improve on it. The average person probably doesn't really need to do any of that. They can just kind of reassemble it as is, and I'm sure it worked fine, but there's some things I thought were a little bizarre, so I kind of changed some things up to try to improve on things and prevent anything from shorting out or burning up in the future. So I'm not really quite sure how to go about the correct order of reinstalling all these components, but I can tell you what not to do. One thing I did was I used some urethane caulking to try to seal things up a little bit better. You can see the black. It's pretty much anything, all the shiny caulking, and you can see right there is urethane, which is really good for sealing stuff up. I used a Loctite roofing urethane, which I use for a lot of stuff. It's really good stuff. From my research, you generally don't want to use anything silicone, including like greases or silicone sealants around motors, because I believe it can affect your brush life. It can mess with the brushes on motors. So that's why I use the urethane. It's just extremely sticky and it gets on everything. And I had the clean air motor in and out here several times. I was putting this back in and just got the urethane all over everything. So if you did want to try to seal things up better, I highly recommend doing that last, after you have everything all together. And if you feel like you need to seal it up a little better, do it last. But I'm sure it's probably sealed fine on its own. So one thing I would recommend is probably, this might be wrong, I'm not a vacuum tech by any means, I'm kind of new to this, but I think it's probably best to start with the direct air motor. Drop that in first, and you can see the wiring harness kind of comes up there through the wall You have to put this little separate piece on here, and it kind of drops into place. It's actually not in place right now, but there's a little, there it goes, notch that falls into, and that wire harness comes up through a hole in it. So you kind of have to route that through, and then there's your black hot wire and your white neutral wire for that motor. The black kind of wraps around the back side here, and they both go, they're under the this wire harness here, but they come through the wall. I'd probably do that first, and then just leave all your wires loose for the time being while you're installing everything, and then drop in your clean air motor here. And it's a little tricky because it's kind of supported by these two pieces of foam here. On the suction here, that piece of foam just kind of slides down, and I would keep an eye out when you put yours in. Make sure that piece of foam isn't pinched there. You kind of have to kind of guide it in, and then this piece of foam on the outside kind of seals off the discharge of the air from the suction. I should say this seals it off, but this also seals it off too. So there's kind of different compartments in here. So this would be the exhaust side, and this would be your suction side, and there's just kind of a dead area in here in between the two. You can see kind of some spots where I added the urethane in there, just to seal everything up a little better. But this wire harness here is for the switch to turn off the direct air motor when you have this upright. And that kind of comes through there and kind of goes under everything to the wire harness that goes into the board there. So you also have to kind of route that below the motor. So below everything is the power harness that comes in from the handle. So it's kind of on the left-hand side right here. There's a black hot, a white neutral wire, and I think 2 control wires that go up to the handle. Show them right there. And those come up into the harness here, and everything's pretty much plugged in up here. You have these two are your hot neutral for the power. Then below that, I believe is, see if I can get it in here. There's a blue and a red quick connect, which are neutrals, I believe. One from each motor, and then on the bottom there's also blue and red. Those are the hots, one for each motor, and they're labeled DAM and CAM, as in direct air motor and clean air motor. Everything's pretty much labeled on the board, and you can kind of figure out what wire's what as you put it back together. But here's some quirky things I found too. I spent a lot of time getting this clean air motor back in, and when I tore it apart, the factory installation had the wire harness and the hot neutral on the left-hand side here. That was buried in the bottom, and on the bottom there is your other motor brush holder. So you have a motor brush holder there. Opposite side's your other brush holder, kind of in the corner there at an angle. And all these wires were under that brush, and they were crushed and pinched. So they were tight against the motor, almost holding the motor in place, which was kind of odd. And then there's another motor wire that was pinched as well, which you see right here. This white neutral wire coming over the top here. Originally that was on the bottom, as well as the hot for the clean air motor. On the back side here, so see that little blue flag terminal in the back here. That is, I believe, the hot, and then way on the bottom is the neutral for the clean air motor. Originally, those were running under this motor, and they were both crushed and pinched, which I found a little worrisome. It seemed like eventually over time those would have shorted out onto the motor and cause a problem. So I rerouted those to the top here. So you're seeing that neutral on the top right here. So what I did was the neutral for the clean air motor I flipped, it has a right angle flag terminal. I flipped that around and had it pointed this way. Normally it goes, I believe, to the left. And there are two little ribs below this motor in the back here, which you can't see. That it seems like they were kind of designed to support it at one point, but they aren't. There's actually clearance there. That is kind of troublesome with that flag terminal. It kind of crushes in there. How it was crushed. And I cut the rib on the right. There's two of them. There's a left one and a right one. I cut a little chunk out of the right one to give me a little more clearance on that blue flag terminal for the white neutral wire to come out to the right side, which I thought made more sense and should be a little safer, I think, for assembly. And you can see all my wires, I kind of bent them so everything's kind of not touching other stuff and just kind of hanging in air. So there shouldn't be any issues with it rubbing and wearing or pinching. So that's what I did there. And it was not easy to do, but I did it. But I'm sure it may be fine just how it was, but I thought that seemed like a better assembly technique to me. And all these wires on the left aren't pinched anymore. And the motor is kind of freely sitting in there now. It's bizarre how this is mounted too. You can see the two lines, these two little grooves are where the top housing kind of pinches in on this, clamps on it, and keeps everything in place. And it's also kind of also mounted from that suction foam on that side. But everything is just kind of cantilevered over. It's kind of hanging there. And there is a mount. You can see that little, it looks like foam, it's actually rubber. That black piece of rubber does sit in a bracket. You can see I added some more urethane caulking in there. But it is nowhere close to touching the bracket. It's just kind of hanging there midair. And this thing's even, laying down on its back, which you really never do in the vacuum. Usually this thing would be upright. And so if it was touching anywhere, it'd be on, the motor would be hanging on that side. So when you put your top cover back on everything, I most recommend, I think I'm going to do it while it's on its side like this. So the weight of that motor is down and the suction face is tight, and then when the top cover clamps down on here, everything's kind of down this way, and then it's kind of cantilevered from that side. I don't know if at one point they had a bracket on this top housing that came down onto that, which would make sense to me to have it supported on this side as well as this side, but there is no bracket on that side to support the motor over here. It's just kind of hanging off of these. Maybe they had vibration issues at some point. I'm not quite sure, but that's my plan for it. And as I said, all the wire routing I have high up on this side rather than below, so it was being crushed, as I said, under that brush holder. Now it's just kind of sitting on top of the brush holder. I don't think you can see the brush holder, but it's right under all that wiring. The ground wire, which actually isn't a ground because there's no ground on this vacuum because it's not a grounded appliance, as most vacuums aren't unless it's an industrial vacuum. But I put it back as it was from the factory into the foil tape, which I believe helps to kind of dissipate some of the static and spread it from zapping anything. But I kind of squished it back into the tape, and I have the part coming for that new spring. The new design uses a little leaf spring that goes from the screw to touch that foil rather than the wire. But for now, I'm just living with the wire. But the board, now to get to the board, that's a little funky as well. I got everything wired back up, and it just kind of lays loose in there. I shouldn't say loose, but there's a slot on the left and the right that slides down into, but it doesn't really snap into place. It's not fastened by anything. There's a little rib on the top cover, which I believe kind of comes down, contacts there. I didn't really verify that it actually contacts there or not, but there's a lot of play in there. And if you look, it's a little tough to see, but way down in that back corner, see if I can get my light down this, there's a capacitor in that far bottom right corner that is touching the slot, the plastic slot that this slides down into. And that's a pretty tiny capacitor. And you can see some other components in there. Let's see if I can zoom in here. There are some other components in there. It's a little tough to see, but that are very close, if not touching, the edge of that plastic slot, which is a little worrisome. So what I ended up doing was, just like I did with the seals, I took some black urethane and kind of put it into the slot to try to tighten up everything and help out with vibration issues, because I'm sure when you're running this, as it was from the factory, that board has to be vibrating in there, and some of those components look like they could be rubbing right on that slot. And maybe that's some of the reason why these boards are going bad, from vibration or just tight clearances. They're touching other parts, but you can see that cap too is right close up on that wire harness. But everything's pretty much hooked back up. I got the air pressure sensors hooked back up. Those two go over there, and these two lines come over here, and that little piece is mounted down into that slot. But that's really about it. Everything's cleaned up and put back together, and I'm ready to put my top cover back on, and it should be all sealed up, hopefully a little better. It's not going to be the prettiest thing to get back apart, because it's going to be more difficult with all this urethane I have on there. It's going to be a lot stickier, but hopefully I never need it apart again, with the exception of me putting that new ground spring on. But just another little detail to add, I think I forgot to mention the thermal protector, which is that little shiny piece down at the bottom there. See it? It's mounted with 2 screws, and just be aware that those 2 screws are one of the few only screws on this whole vacuum that are different than the other ones. They're just slightly shorter than the rest of the screws, and basically you just keep those aside and make sure they go into that thermal protector right there, and basically just mounted it the same way it came out, put it back in. And then another thing I forgot to mention is I realized that there's a little gap. You can see the grooves, these 2 grooves right here in the foam that kind of mounts the motor and kind of seals everything off, although it does have a secondary, I should say the primary seal for the suction, which seals off there, pulls air from the bag. It also has this secondary seal to more or less act like a mount. I think that's pretty much how where the mount for the whole motor is, to hold it in place. But I thought it makes sense to have that seal off as well. But it had 2 gaps basically right in the middle. They were about a 1/4 inch. So I went ahead and took some foam tape and just kind of wedged it in there, just to seal everything off a little better. One spot you don't want to forget, which I did, is that little silver screw at the bottom of the direct air motor. Basically holds the whole direct air motor down flush where it seals at the bottom there. So don't forget that one screw. That's one of the few screws that are different than all the others on this vacuum, is that one silver big flanged screw down there, and those 2 I mentioned before, shorter screws that go on the thermal protector down at the bottom there. So don't forget that screw. I should add, that same time I did all that, I put my wheels back on, and this little axle over here connects up to your height adjustment. So I kind of did that all at the same time. As this little plate here that holds everything in with, I think, 2 screws there. I use dry lube on that because it's right by your carpet, so it's, like I said before, it's a Teflon PTFE dry lube. So I kind of coated the whole axle, and the plastic inside here, I kind of coated that, as well as the wheels too. Even though these are brass or bronze bushing, it spins on these this cast aluminum axle. I threw some dry lube on that too. And then I think I mentioned it before, but these felt seals, I threw dry lube on that too, just to kind of help it out a little bit. Alright, so here's where we're at. I got the body over here dropped into the head. As you can see, the top cover is on, buttoned up. So when you do that, you got these brackets right here, these swivel brackets, and the big nut collar that goes over the housing on each side. And then there's also a seal in here. I'll point that out in a minute. But basically, you want to put that nut on, and then put that bracket over. I put some silicone grease between the two. It was pretty dry. There was nothing there, and you can see some wear in it. I thought that made sense to put silicone there, silicone grease. It shouldn't see too much dirt in there, but you could use dry lube too if you wanted. And then you just kind of drop them in to the head here, and you can see the screw there. There's another one down there, and I actually kind of pushed everything this direction as I tightened up that bracket to help keep everything tight against here. It's kind of loose. It's kind of a loose fit. These that big nut just kind of sits there. There's two grooves on each side that it kind of sits in to keep it from spinning. But on this side, I actually did kind of the opposite. So this side, I kind of pulled this over, everything over kind of towards me as I tightened it, because there's it's a little tough to see, but it's down in there is a seal. It's a large seal that goes over everything. You have to put that back on, and I used a little dry lube on that, some Teflon dry lube to kind of seal that up. And the reason I pushed everything over this way was to keep that seal tight against the suction housing here on the head. And then when I put this top little cover on the suction path, I kind of pushed this over that way to kind of keep it tight against that seal. And I tightened the bolts up on it, the screws on it right there and there and there. So that was my method to do that. I thought it would kind of seal things up a little bit better. Here's the height adjustment here. I threw some silicone grease on that as well. I think I had some lithium grease on it previously. I greased up the little bar here. It goes to the wheels. And then I threw the light reflector that screws in with 3 screws. These were, I was a couple screws short. When I bought this, it was missing a couple screws, and so these silver screws are actually replacements that I had laying around that are pretty similar to the black ones. So that's why these are silver. Normally these should be black. And then you can see the little spring assist that helps take weight off the body of the vacuum when you swivel it upright and back down. So that was off, so I had to put that back on. Just be careful that it's a spring, so when you put that on, you want to have it upright like that to take the tension off of the spring. But to get it on, though, 1 second here. To get it on, you kind of have to have it down like this to put that bracket in, and leave this loose, and then tip it upright. Once it's upright, the tension will be off that spring. You can screw that axle into place there. And I threw some silicone grease on that as well to kind of help it out a little bit. And if I swivel back here, I routed the wire harness, and I reattached it with a zip tie. Reattached that little plastic washer, nylon washer there, and routed it through and up over here, and then that's really about it so far. And now I have to drop in the Hall effect sensor, and then we'll go from there. Alright, we're on the home stretch here. We got our light board installed, and the sensor board in the middle there. and the wire harness is all hooked up. To go back where we were before, you see our wire harness is routed down through here. There's a zip tie right there that was replaced. The original was right there as well. You have a little nylon washer holding it in place there. And then the Hall effect sensor is right here. That was a little tricky getting in. So after you kind of put that in, I routed the wire for that under the white wire harness there, as well as this green ground wire that attaches to the Hall effect sensor right there. It comes back to the light board, which is right there, and it's labeled HSFG, which I believe may mean it's a higher frequency ground. I'm not really sure. Again, this is not a grounded appliance. There's no ground on the cord on this, so what that does, I'm not quite sure. There's a thing that they do for bearings. You typically want to ground a ball bearing, because when it spins so fast, it can actually produce capacitance and actually kind of pit the balls on the bearing and wear it out prematurely. And to overcome that, you ground them. And I don't know if that's what they're doing for the ball bearings on this Hall effect sensor, but once again, this isn't grounded because there's no ground on here. But maybe there's something on the light board to kind of dissipate some of that capacitance that's built up in the ball bearings. I'm not quite sure, but regardless, that's how they did it. The Hall effect sensor, you can see I've installed there, and there's a little bracket that holds the hinge for it right there in place. And I tore all this apart. That was the main problem with this vacuum, was the Hall effect sensor was just jammed up with hair, and it was actually kind of wrapped up inside the ball bearings. And I took everything apart. I still have the original ball bearings in there, but I flipped them. After I cleaned them out, I actually take out off the shields or anything like that. I just kind of wiped them clean and cleaned off all the junk. But I flipped them so the outside is now on the inside, so the good seals are on the outside of them. It's a little trick you can do to kind of keep on using what you already got if you don't want to buy new ball bearings. But there's the sensor and the spring. I did modify the spring a little bit. I thought these springs just really, in the idler arm here, on the Hall effect sensor, didn't really have much tension on them, so I kind of bent the ends in just a little bit to get a little more tension on it. My belt's kind of old too, though, so once I get a new belt on here, it should have a little more tension on it as well. Here's the belt, and that just kind of routes up through the bottom. Here, I can put it in place. So that's what the belt looks like when it's installed. It'll be on the pulley here on the motor, and then going through the belt tensioner idler arm. That is the Hall effect sensor here. And the Hall effect sensor does have a black cord, cable I should say, that I have routed under. Just pull this belt back out. That's routed under the white harness here. That's kind of tricky routing all through here, stuffing all that in. I get the spring in place and that little plastic bracket, but it's doable, but it's tight in there. And then yeah, you can see the ground wire down here, and then the black cable for the Hall effect sensor comes up here next to the white wire harness. So let's plug into the light board right there and there, and then the ground is soldered onto the board, and that attaches from that terminal right there. I have the light board installed, and then the dirt sensor board is right here. That's installed as well. It plugs in there, and it comes back over to the top light sensor, and then this comes around to a hole in the side. And after I put the sensor, there's a sensor on the top and bottom, basically like a beam that goes shoots to one another to detect the dirt. And then after I routed through the hole, I thought they just kind of had an open hole here. I thought it made sense to kind of plug that up, so I just kind of took some electrical tape and and tape that over and kind of fasten the wires to it a little bit just to keep them from routing around. I added this zip tie as well as to kind of tidy things up. And then the boards on here too, the way they're mounted, they just kind of snap in. You can see that snap right there, and they just kind of sit on these ribs along this reflector piece right here. And I wasn't too crazy about that, just because it can really, you can see it moving here if I touch it. I wasn't too crazy about that because there's a lot of vibration in this machine, and it's just rattling around on there. There's a lot of delicate components, so I took just a couple more dabs of that black urethane that I used in the vacuum, and just kind of put them where the mounting ribs are here, just to kind of dampen the vibrations in this a little bit, make it a little more rigid on there, rather than just moving, jiggling around. I did the same thing on the dirt sensor board in there. You can see some urethane along the, this kind of slides into slots into the housing. So I did the same thing there, just keep it from rattling around, and that's held in with a little plastic wash there as well. I should make a comment here too. Before I did all this, I took pictures of everything before I tore everything apart, and I definitely needed them to come back and see how all the wires and everything were routed and where everything was and where all the hardware was. So I definitely recommend that if you decide to go through a rebuild like this. Just always take lots of pictures because you'll definitely use them. Hopefully this video helps out a little bit too. But yeah, we're around the tail end here. We got that board, the boards put back in, the main board's in there, whiteboard, dirt sensor board, all effects sensors good to go. I'll get my belt back on, get the top cover on, and that should be just about it. A couple other things tidied up, and that should be it. You got the, still have the brush roll over here. I'll talk about that. I can talk about that right now. So I rebuilt the brush roll using the same, all the same components. I did not put anything new in, and I think I'll be all right just using it as is. This is the older, I shouldn't say older, I believe they switched from a double brush design that was like a steel tube brush roll, and I think like 5 or 6 years ago on the .4s, the R40P.4s, they changed to this aluminum design with 3 brush strips. And for whatever reason, a couple years ago, I think on around the .6 model, R40.6, they changed back to the I believe they changed back to the 2-strip design with a steel brush roll. Why? I'm not quite sure. I did see someone comment that they thought it was for static reasons, but I have seen a YouTube video where somebody actually preferred this brush roll over the newer 2-strip brush roll. They thought this agitated a little better, so I'll probably stick with this and just see how it goes. They do still offer strips for these, so I'm gonna get some new strips. Probably these don't look too bad, but I did flip them. I took them out and flipped them the other way, so as they wear, kind of one side will wear more than the other, kind of grip. So I flipped them so they'll be a little more aggressive, almost like they're fresh brushes. And one thing I thought was odd is that you can see on the end here, there's a pretty big gap there. I shouldn't say big gap, but that gap there compared to this end has, focus here, you can see there's a smaller distance from the brush to the edge of the red plastic that holds it in, which means they're not symmetric. So if you flip them, it kind of moves where the brushes are. And as mine was, let me point out a spot here. As mine was, the brushes hit the base plate. My brushes hit these little steel wires, these little steel guards. You can see right there, for example, where it just kind of chews out the brush in that spot from hitting that steel guard, that steel wire. And I found that I have yet to put it back in, but what I did was I flipped them, because I believe if you flip them, it will space this over just a hair, and it will not hit those steel strips. So I don't know if they just put some of these backwards or what, or I'm not quite sure. But I'm gonna try that out and see how that works. One good tip to know is when you rebuild these brush rolls is to, again, take pictures. But these are balanced. They do balance these, and I don't believe that they purposely unbalance them for it to vibrate, to get vibrations. I believe, I could be wrong here, but I believe they balance it so it is balanced and it runs smoothly, and so it doesn't prematurely wear your ball bearings, and so everything works how it should. That's normally what you do, but I didn't know if they purposely misbalance these to add vibration, to get good agitation, but I don't think they do that. But I can't remember. I think it's on this side. If you take the rubber caps off, there are mine had 2 or 3 little set screws screwed into the side that balance the brush roll, and you can kind of hold each side and kind of spin it yourself each way and kind of get an idea if it's balanced or not, because it'll kind of want to turn a little bit from one side to another. But mine was pretty good, but when I flipped these brushes, I realized that I didn't mark where each brush was, because I thought these brush strips probably don't weigh the same. So I took them all off and weighed them, and they were pretty close. But one was slightly different, and luckily I marked each strip before I took it off so I could put it back in the same spot. So that's a good tip, is if you take your brush strips out, mark them in a manner. Best way to do is put a little scribe in it or engrave it of some sort rather than marker, which could come off. But just kind of scribe it so you know which strip is what. You need to put it back in. But when you get new brush strips, though, I don't know what to do there. I don't know if they purposely weigh them so they all weigh the same or not. But just keep an eye out on that. You can see there's a little X there. I did not put that X there. I don't know if that was from the factory or if this has been rebuilt by someone else before. And there's kind of a little X there, but that was not for me. I believe those, no, it's not right there. Well, regardless, yeah, it was right there. I had 2 tiny little scribes, if you see them in the middle there, and on the plastic and on there. And luckily I took pictures, because it was tough for me to tell where those scribes were. But when I took this all apart, I definitely need those to make sure that I put this back together the same and everything was still balanced. And you can kind of check that by spinning it by hand, make sure it's not too wonky. But I just kind of took everything apart, took the bearings out. My bearings weren't too bad. Just kind of cleaned them off and cleaned everything up. But those are just kind of some tips I thought I'd throw out there on doing the brush roll. And it takes some time to pull everything out and check everything, especially if you have to kind of put everything back exactly how it was originally to keep everything balanced. But just to throw out some tips there for you. But we'll put that back in a second here. But all right, that's where we're at, and we'll start to finish everything up. So we got our base plate back on here, the brush rolls back on, the belts on. This is what we look like for our belt here. It's routed through here. I like the tension on it. It's better than it was before. This barely had any tension on it. I cleaned this with alcohol, as well as the belt rubbing alcohol and the pulley. I thought that would help with any like slippage, because that's why it was originally tripping off. Well, it was jammed up with hair, but I thought if I got these nice and grippy too and cleaned up, it would keep the sensor spinning freely and properly, and keep it from tripping off. But that's the tension we have on right now. It's pretty happy with it. Alright, we got our top cover on here, sitting on there. It's all screwed on too. So there's 4 or 6 screws for that. There's one there. There's one hidden by the wheel there. There's the other one, and then another one, I think, under the wheel. There's one down there as well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I believe, screws. You just kind of have to line up the top and make sure it's all good. And there's tabs in the front here. I think you want to put those tabs in, make sure those are in there good. And one funky thing with mine is it broke at one point from the previous owner, so there was a little rib. The top housing here had a little rib in it that kind of lined with the bottom half, and it broke off. So now it has like a little flex to it. You can kind of see it moving there. And ideally, these should probably have a screw that kind of connects the two in this region, because there's a lot of stress there on the upright adjustment of the foot pedal there. You can kind of see it moving there, so there's a little more play than usual. That's all right. I can live with it, but it'd be nice if they had a kind of a screw there connecting these two. Maybe there's something I can do to kind of tighten that up, but oh well. But it's all together now. That's pretty much it. I got my filters on. Got the charcoal filter, the HEPA filter, bags over there on my front cover, which I can throw on there without a bag in it, just for looks. But that's it. And one neat thing I realized too is that if you don't really use the attachments on this, if you're just using it more for a vacuum, you can take the wand and the hose off of this, and you can shed a pound or two. Just leave those off, and as long as you're not using the tools, because you have the valve here, so it's just using the brush roll head, and this is just off from the valve. So that's probably how I'll use it without the attachments at all. And you shed a couple pounds, and it's more the weight of a normal vacuum then. But other than that, that's pretty much it. So we'll fire it up here and cross our fingers and hope it runs. There we go. Fire it up and see what happens. Turn it on. The clean air motor will fire up, and then once you recline it back, the direct air motor will kick in.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Looks pretty good.